Kramer Reinhardt, international terrorist. Deke De Silva, New York City cop. One man can bring the world to its knees, and only one man can stop him. Universal Pictures presents Sylvester Stallone in Nighthawks. Nighthawks, rated R. No.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Unfinished Business Television, where we talk about movies and stuff. This week is a deep dive with a special guest. But before I introduce him, let me introduce myself for any newcomers. I am Jeff Galashaw, Unfinished B2 on social media. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Andre Joseph of AJ Epics.
Don't litter.
And our special guest is author Paul Talbot. And today we are going to talk about a 1981, I guess, quite historic New York thriller by the name of Nighthawks with Sylvester Stallone and Billy D. Williams and Rutger Hauer. This thriller, yeah, it's a thrill. It's a little bit of old school and new school since it takes place in 1981, but it still has that 70s feel before action heroes became the end-all, be-all. You know, it took teamwork to take somebody down. And in this film, Rutger Hauer is an international terrorist going by the name Wolfgar, who is kind of in the outs in Europe and runs to New York to make, strangely, what does everybody come to New York for? To make a name for himself. And hot on his trail is Interpol and also Sylvester Stallone, Billy D. Williams as two undercover sergeants who are pulled in to, I guess, help track him initially. But then Stallone gets a little more personally involved. This thriller is directed by Bruce Maloof, original director Gary Nelson, stepped away, and it has Joe Spinell, Lindsay Wagner, and it also strangely has an actress I had never seen before, Persis Kambata as Shaka, a kind of right-hand woman message supplier to Rutger Hauer. So this was Rutger Hauer's first American film, and he goes through the film marvelously. That's pretty much the plot of the film. Paul Talbot, tell us about your experience with the film over the years, first seeing it. What was your opinion of this film?
Okay. Yeah, Nighthawks, I guess the only movie that begins and ends with scenes of Sylvester Stallone in drag. So that makes it stand out right then and there. Yeah, I saw the original Rocky when that came out, and I was a huge fan of that. I became a huge fan of Sylvester Stallone. I bought a bunch of magazines about him, saw him on the talk shows, bought the Rocky soundtrack album, the Rocky novelization. I worshiped Sylvester Stallone. So then, of course, after that, he made Fist and he made Paradise Alley, two completely different type of movies. Then he made Rocky 2. So I was keeping up with all of that. I was watching all his movies. And then Nighthawks came out. I saw the preview for that. That was heavily promoted with TV ads. So I was like, I got to see this one. You know, here's Stallone different. He's got a beard. He's got glasses. And that was his first R-rated movie, or at least his first R-rated movie with him as the lead. So I was too young at the time to see the R-rated movies, but fortunately at the time there was a theater that would let us, which they wouldn't check IDs. They'd let us, you know, buy the ticket. So I saw Nighthawks, and it really blew me away. It was a really good, gritty thriller, lots of scary stuff in it, very disturbing because Lindsay Wagner from the TV show Bionic Woman was Stallone's girlfriend in it. And of course, she's kind of put in jeopardy. So that was kind of disturbing for me. And so it was just a really good thriller. It was probably one of the first New York gritty thrillers that I saw. You know, and again, an R-rated New York thriller. And I've always loved it. And as I got a little bit older and started getting into researching backgrounds of movies, started researching this one, you know, the history behind it. So I've always loved Nighthawks. Very and it's got a very strong cult following. At the time, it wasn't a huge hit, but the people that did see it kind of remembered it. And then, of course, it would be popular on cable TV, VHS. It was one of those ones. When I was in college in a fraternity, we would always have a movie night, and I would be in charge of bringing the movie. And I brought that one time, and everybody liked it. So Nighthawks was one of those ones that slowly built up a really strong cult following.
Okay. And Andre, I know you are a big fan of this film. So tell us about your experience with it.
It's a pretty crazy thing for me because for me, as a kid, I had seen maybe some of the Rambo movies on TV little by little. My neighbor, who was a little older than me, was like a bigger Stallone fan than I was. And when he moved away, he gave me some of his Rambo figures. And from there, I got into Rocky and watching the Rocky movies on TV. So I remember one time out of a catalog, I bought the 1985 Rocky IV fan magazine right before the movie came out. And it not only was just about that Rocky movie and the ones that came before, but it also was like there was a section that had Stallone's biography in there and talking about the different films he did, one of which was Nighthawks. And I just remember this cool picture of him in the subway station with his beard and the gun and the glasses. And, it was like I was kind of curious to see what this was. And he teams up with Billy D. Williams, who I only knew from Star Wars. And so that really kind of intrigued me to find it. And finally, when I did see it, it was on cable, and I only caught like the last half of it. So I had to rent the VHS from Blockbuster to see the beginning. And I gotta say, like growing up with Lethal Weapon and Die Hard and all the other action movies that came later in the 80s, this one actually ended up becoming one of my personal favorites, not just Stallone's biography, but also just action movies of that period, simply because of the fact that it's New York City, it's these gritty cops chasing after this terrorist. Rutger Hauer's performance is just incredible, and it's obvious why, coming off of doing the Paul Verhoeven movies like Soldier of Orange, among other films that got him noticed, that he would ultimately be the scene stealer all the way through. And there's a little bit more behind that. Um, and I just became more fascinated with it over time because of the fact that it wasn't like one of his biggest hits that had a franchise, but it was just this one movie that had all of these elements of like a 1970s urban thriller mixed with the Keith Emerson music and this odd cast of people. Like I said, Persis Kambata was in Star Trek: The Motion Picture. You had Lindsay Wagner from The Bionic Woman. And so over the years, I've been trying to like deep dive and research. And, I was starting to go to Hollywood to visit and go to like the shops where they sell the posters and lobby cards. And I would notice there were a lot of scenes that were deleted from this movie. There was a lot more stuff with Lindsay Wagner that was cut, a couple of things with Rutger Hauer we never saw. So I was obsessed with finding out what this movie was supposed to be. And over time, through some of Stallone's books that have been written about his life, as well as the recent Blu-ray that came out a couple of years ago, I learned this was a very different movie than what we got. In fact, there's two versions of how this was put together. So Paul Silbert, who primarily was known for production design work in major studio films, he was commissioned by United Artists to do a movie about Carlos the Jackal, which was the sole basis for the Wolfgar character. And he had produced a script. It didn't get picked up. And then at some point, it must have went into this weird turnaround. And that coincided with David Shaper, who wrote The Warriors, being commissioned to write a movie that was essentially a third French Connection film, because the second one did, I guess, okay. And so Fox wanted to do a third movie with Gene Hackman and Richard Pryor as partners going after a national terrorist. And Hackman didn't want to play Popeye Doyle again, so that got into turnaround. And I guess Universal decided to combine the two scripts into what actually was not originally called Nighthawks. It was originally called The Attack. And the plot was generally the same. It was these two different cops going after a terrorist, but the terrorist was Hispanic and totally a knockoff of Carlos the Jackal. And that was going to be a Hispanic actor. I don't know who originally, but the studio was so nervous of Hispanic people protesting in the streets of New York, they said, well, let's make him an Aryan terrorist. And that's how we got Rutger Hauer. Um, and then I guess somewhere along the way, Stallone got involved, and he pretty much, at this point, he had the two Rocky movies. But as Paul said, Paradise Alley and Fist were not big hits. So, he was trying to do everything possible to make this something different for him and not for the audience that would go out to a Rocky movie. And therefore, that's why you had things such as, just a lot of the different script changes to strengthen his character. And of course, a big change in directorship. But let's get into what Paul knows, because I know there's a bit of trivia here that he might be deep diving into as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
The interesting thing is, Andre, I know Wikipedia has that information that it was originally a French Connection 3 with Richard Pryor as a sidekick, but I was not able to confirm that. I know Wikipedia says that. Have you seen that anywhere else about it being a French Connection 3? Because Wikipedia does not have a citation for that information. And I did a pretty tight research and I could not find anything about that. Did you ever come across any other sources about the French Connection 3 connection?
That's the funny thing you mentioned that, because the only two things I know of was that I think there was, and I'm an idiot that I never downloaded this, but there was a French Connection 3 script in the 90s that I think was legit, and it was never produced. And then I also heard, and like Hollywood likes to spread stuff that never happens, but there was a time of talking about remaking the French Connection back in the 2000s with either Bruce Willis or Brad Pitt as Popeye Doyle. But the closest thing was that Ed O'Neill TV movie that in some countries was billed as French Connection 3.
Right. Yeah, one thing is, because there definitely was, in the early 1980s, 20th Century Fox was planning French Connection 3 as a TV movie. Obviously, without Gene Hackman, was not going to be the TV movie. So that was going to be a French Connection 3 TV movie that was hopefully going to spin off as a Popeye Doyle TV series, again, not with Gene Hackman.
Right.
So the thing about Nighthawks being based on a French Connection 3, I can't really buy that, because also I don't think, at that point, Richard Pryor was a big name. He would not be doing sidekicks at that point. So I don't think, so I think that thing that Wikipedia says about Nighthawks originally being French Connection 3, I'm not sure if I buy that, again, because the Wikipedia does not have a citation for it, which always is a red flag. So I think that I think Nighthawks being derived from a French Connection 3, I think that may be some type of an urban myth, just in my opinion. So because I have not been able to confirm that. So as I can see, what you said, it started with Paul Silbert wrote the original script.
Yeah.
And it was called, like you said, The Attack. And The Attack, it was A period, T period, A period, C period. That's where The Attack came from, which stood for Anti-Terrorist Action Command. So, and then what you said was correct about being based on the Jackal, and they couldn't get it off the ground, so it went to Turnaround, and then it ended up at Universal. And that's where David Shaber, who, like you said, wrote The Warriors, he did the rewrite on it. So I think so again, I'm not sure about the French Connection 3. I think it was, like you said, Silbert wrote the script at UA, went to Turnaround, Universal bought that script, and Shaber revised it. An interesting thing, and then Stallone, like we were talking about, was looking for different stuff in between the Rocky movies and was looking for some kind of a gritty New York cop movie. This fit the bill. And that's why the first thing he said was, when he saw the title page, he said, well, I've already done Fist, F period, I period, S period, T period. We got to change the name. We can't call it attack with the periods and that. So that's how, and like you said, and then it became the title changed to Hawks at
Yeah.
that point. And then, as he usually does, because Stallone had done, Rocky, Paradise Alley, Fist, and Rocky 2. He wrote all of them, of course. They were all original scripts, except for Fist. He rewrote Joe Esterhaus. So obviously at this point, and from then on, Stallone had a hand in rewriting the scripts, often was not credited. For example, for Nighthawks, he did an extensive rewrite, but was not given credit for it. So that's how, I guess, how the screenplay kind of developed. So at that point, then it became a Universal Pictures movie, like you said. And it went into, let's see, in the fall of 1979, it got the official go. Universal says, we're going to make this movie. They still were calling it Attack, not with the periods in it, but just, the full name Attack.
Right.
And then they started filming in New York City starting in January of 1980. So like you said, one good thing about it has that gritty New York feel, not just New York, but also New York in winter. We can see in the film, you can sense the coldness. We don't see any snow, but we can sense the coldness.
When they're walking in the Bronx, I know that weather.
Exactly, right. An interesting thing too, because also in this film, Stallone, of course, known for his physique and the Rocky pictures, and for Nighthawks, he changed his appearance. Like we talked about, he had a beard, he had those glasses, and because of the coldness, he's completely covered in this film too. So he was a little bit heavier also, and of course, we don't even see his arms in this movie because he's completely covered the whole film with winter clothes, winter coats. Okay.
Yeah, he apparently he wanted to look like a fleshy cop, so I guess doing the ride-alongs, him and Billy D, to try to get into that New York City police force type of feel. He ate a lot of McDonald's at that time to gain the weight, and because he was going through marital situations at that time, and apparently he would lock himself in the hotel room between shoots, or sometimes go to Studio 54 and party, and I guess hook up with some ladies every now and then. He actually started to gain fat during the production and had to try to find a way to cut it down. So once he went off, like towards the end of the shoot, he started doing Victory and shaved off the beard, got into like ripped shape. Huge difference than the 4 months he spent shooting Nighthawks.
Right. Yeah, the same thing is, it's like a lot of people kind of forget this, but when Stallone started after Rocky, he was very much like a Robert De Niro and a Robert Duvall in a way, where each film he would change his appearance completely. So like you said, then after Nighthawks, when he did Victory, he was probably the thinnest he ever was when he did Victory. He of course was still had a physique like a soccer player, but he was very, very thin. And then of course after that he did Rocky 3, where of course he was bigger than he ever was, perfectly, definition of muscles. He actually built himself up, with to look like almost like a bodybuilder in Rocky 3. So in that early stage, again, like I said, he was very much like a Robert De Niro, where he was changed his appearance, differently each time, perhaps to the detriment of his fan base, because he was never able to, during this period, he kind of like, he was a huge hit with Rocky, and then he did, and then he did not have another hit until Rocky 2. And then after Rocky 2, did not have another hit until Rocky 3. So it was kind of like, and then of course he did the Rambo movie. So of course, in that early stage, he kind of like lost his audience by not looking the way the audience preferred him to be, obviously, the way his fans preferred him to be. And interesting, at the time, he was, in 1979, he was number 6 on the annual poll of box office champions, which was determined by theater owners and managers, meaning how much he's bringing in. And of course, that 1979, that was based on Rocky 2, which put him back on top again. And then he was not even in the top 25 in 1980, because he had no movies at all released in 1980. So that really shows you how much his popularity declined when he wasn't doing a Rocky film. and that Nighthawks was supposed to be, like we said, it was filmed in 1980. It was supposed to be a Christmas release from Universal for Christmas of 1980, but they decided shortly after production, right after it was filmed, they decided they were going to hold it until spring of 1981 because they already had, I think, enough films for 1980. So not only, like, as we said, Stallone didn't even have a film released in 1980. So that's one of the main reasons why he was not on the chart for 1980, because he didn't have a film released in 1980.
Yeah, that kind of brings up basically the production issues that resulted in that delay, because when they first started shooting the movie, Gary Nelson, who had directed The Black Hole for Disney, was the original director of the film. And apparently, according to Rucker Hauer, he had a good sense of what the movie needed to be, which was this idea of two sides of the same coin. Like, yes, here's Stallone playing, ironically, a Vietnam vet before Rambo, but he's kind of a pacifist. He doesn't want to pull out his gun and shoot a suspect. He'd rather like try to disarm them, like in that opening scene where he's dressed in drag and chases the mugger. He doesn't pull out his gun, he just fights him. And then also, at the same time, it seemed like Rucker Hauer, he's killing, but he's killing for a purpose with people that I guess he's trying to speak out for in his own violent way. So when they started shooting the movie, there were some conflicts because I guess Stallone felt Gary Nelson was shooting too slow or didn't really have a handle on it. Interestingly, Randy Jurgensen, the famous New York City cop who was the technical advisor on The French Connection and Cruising, and he was the mobster at the end of Sorcerer who drags Roy Scheider to his death. He was the original technical advisor who actually helped in getting the Queensboro Bridge shut down for the shoot. But when Nelson got fired, so did Randy Jurgensen, because they had a conflict over that scene with Stallone in drag. And then they hired Bruce Malmuth because he was friends with John Avildsen, who directed Rocky. They were like social friends, but he hadn't directed a movie. He primarily had done a lot of commercials and shot New York Mets games. Like, he really had no experience doing a studio picture, but they needed somebody quick. And so apparently the day they were supposed to have him come on board, he had a flight issue and Stallone directed the subway chase. Now, I've also heard from the DP, James Conter, that he shot more than one day as a director. And then the DGA found out there's a rule that, the actor can't take over during the production. So that got the production and Stallone fined and put in trouble. And then at the same time, he and Rucker Hauer did not get along. They had a very hard competitive streak because of the fact that, Hauer was doing all the cool stuff with blowing cars and blowing up buildings, shooting up people with Uzis, the kind of stuff Stallone ended up doing later in his films. And Stallone was really getting increasingly jealous that he was cutting down Rucker Hauer's part and trying to beef up his role. So when they finished the movie and they tested it, they had two versions that were shown, and the one that we got was the Rucker Hauer version because nobody really liked Stallone's character. And apparently Universal even tried to push for an Oscar nomination for Rucker Hauer because they thought he was that good. And you could kind of see it in the marketing that they had lost faith in the movie, because some of the posters either have Stallone and Rucker Hauer in them, or Stallone like really small on the screen. This was before his name was like huge and him with the big muscles. No, they were like downplaying it. And the fact that he had the beard and the glasses only just made people think, is that Al Pacino on screen? That doesn't look like Sylvester Stallone. So really, it just was like you said, Paul, everybody wanted him to be Rocky. They didn't see him as anything else until First Blood came along a year later.
That with the poster with Rucker Hauer Nighthawks, Sylvester Stallone for Nighthawks, was the first time I was aware of that film. And also, I guess with that poster, it shows what Gary Nelson might have been trying to do when, I guess, the few days he had directing the film, because it does make it look like they're on two sides of the coin, or at least one's the hero, one's the villain. but it seems like maybe they have the same mindset in what they're going after. So, I at least that's what I got out of it, because Nighthawks is a movie all my life I've not avoided, but I've never really had time to watch it in full until recently, where I watched it for the first time. And I'm not the biggest Sylvester Stallone fan. I don't have anything against him necessarily, but I when I was growing up, I was used to the Rambo Sylvester Stallone, and I didn't see Rocky movies until Part 3 for the first time. So I was used to that Stallone. So I over the years, I've seen more of his early work. But at that point, seeing him as, Rambo and Rocky, and then seeing this poster for this movie, I'm just like, yeah, I don't really want to see this because it looks slower than his usual. And again, you don't see the physique. So it's like, oh, he's a police detective, like, oh, he can't go shooting people as much as he does in these other films. So when I did finally see it, it's a revelation. And I mean, I can see how audiences felt. I still like Stallone's character, and I like that this is one of those early action films that puts character over necessary action for the most part. But again, Rutger Hauer has the more interesting role. But I found it interesting that Billy D. Williams is almost on the same bill as Sylvester Stallone, but his character is so, I guess, underused, because it just seems like most of the time he's just playing angry through all of his scenes. And then once he gets slashed in the film, it's sort of like it's almost like the film gives him a demotion too. Because like, okay, you're in the background from now on. This is all now Stallone Howard. And that's my problem with the film. It's not what happens to Billy D. Williams, but the first half of this film is so interesting and such like an intricate thriller. And then the second half, it just seems to like realize, oh, we've got to speed up. And I read about, there are many edits of the film. And that's where I feel like you can really tell that this was edited down, because the second half then just becomes more of a typical thriller. And that's where to me, you get the thing of Stallone maybe being a little more peaceful and not wanting to shoot. Whereas before, when him and Billy D. Williams, they don't shoot any of their suspects, but they beat the hell out of them, And then, I guess, as you guys are describing, like all these different versions, it also now makes more sense why Billy D. Williams is the more violent and angry, because Stallone is supposed to be, the more peaceful one, and they are supposed to measure each other out a little bit more. That I don't feel comes across so much early in the film, but makes sense now more later in.
So I want to talk a little about the director changes. I mean, you touched on this already, Andre, but interesting thing, Stallone, of course, went on to, well, at this point, he had already directed 2 movies. He'd already directed Rocky II and Paradise Alley. So, and Stallone was always a pretty strong person anyway. Again, like we said, he wrote the scripts. So, of course, whenever somebody writes a script, they're protective of it. And of course, there's always going to be conflict when the director tries to change stuff. So even in the original Rocky, of course, Stallone wrote that script, directed by John Avildsen. They got along, but of course, there was a little bit of conflict because, of course, Stallone had lived with this character already for many years and had ideas about how it was going to be played. And of course, Stallone was heavily involved with the fight choreography for the first Rocky. And so when it came to do Nighthawks, it seemed like Stallone was looking for almost like a weak director that he could control, because Gary Nelson was kind of a strange choice for this. He had done many TV movies, many TV episodes, and he had directed the Disney comedy Freaky Friday,
Yes.
and The Black Hole, like you said. So his background really had no indication of him being the right person for a movie shot in New York City, a cop thriller. So I think that's one of the reasons why Stallone wanted to use Gary Nelson, because he could maybe control him. And like Andre said, there's the Blu-ray of this. There's an interview with Herb Nanes, who was Stallone's personal manager at the time. He says that Gary Nelson and Stallone did not have any type of a conference together even before filming. So they didn't really start off well. They didn't seem to have any type of meetings where they decide where this film is going to go. And so there was no communication between them before shooting. And you touched on this a little bit, Andre, but one of the things I heard when they were watching the daily, Stallone was not happy with the coverage that Gary Nelson had gotten for the scene with the drug bust early in the film, where Billy D. Williams and Stallone break in that drug bust. There's a little boy there. Stallone was not happy with the coverage. He says there's not enough footage. There should have been more close-ups of the, making the scene more dramatic. There wasn't enough good footage to cut it together. So that was one of the things I heard that Stallone was not happy about. So again, Gary Nelson was gone, and after that, he directed 2 movies: Jimmy the Kid with Gary Coleman and Elaine Quarterman in Lost City of Gold, and then he went right back to many TV movies and episodes. So again, even before and after, Gary Nelson's material didn't seem to fit with Nighthawks. He was a strange choice to begin with. And like Andre said, in between, so they wouldn't have to shut down while they found a new director, Stallone did direct the subway chase scenes. And there's also talk that Stallone directed more. In fact, when I talked to about 10 years ago, I met Rutger Hauer at a convention, and I got him to sign a Nighthawks lobby card. And that's what I asked him too. I said, did Stallone direct this movie? And he said, yes, Stallone did direct it. He said the first director was fired, and he said he brought in a dummy, meaning somebody, a director in name only, who maybe on the set was calling cut and action, but he was following Stallone's guidelines. So Rutger Hauer says, yes, Stallone did direct that movie. And Stallone and Rutger Hauer did not get along because he said, as Rutger Hauer says something in the film, something like, where there's not too much difference between us or something like that. So like we talked about, it's 2 sides of the same coin. Rutger Hauer told me that Gary Nelson understood that theme, but still, he said Stallone never really understood that theme, that they were supposed to be 2 sides of the same coin. So Rutger Hauer did verify to me that Stallone did direct this movie. And like Andre said, there's a ruling. It started with The Outlaw Josie Wales, starring Clint Eastwood. Philip Kaufman wrote the script and started as the director, was fired. Eastwood took over that film. Because of that film, the Directors Guild started a ruling. It's called something like the Eastwood Clause or the Eastwood Ruling or something like that, where when a director is fired, an actor in the movie cannot take over the directing. Another director has to come in. So that's why Stallone could not officially take over as director of Nighthawks. Another thing too, they brought in Bruce Malmuth, who again, like Andre said, he had his background again was in. He was from Brooklyn, so that gave him some credibility. But he had mostly done TV commercials and documentaries. He did an after-school special about a teenage figure skater who befriends a disabled boy. So again, there was nothing in his background really said this guy should be directing a New York cop movie. He was a social friend of Stallone's personal manager. So again, I think Malmuth obviously was happy to be directing his first movie. So he's glad for the opportunity. And I think, again, it was somebody that Stallone could control. And like Rutger Hauer told me, he was just a dummy, meaning, he was like pretend, or what's the word I want to use? Pretending to be the director, but Stallone was really the director. Yeah. So again, and again, there was really no time to, they were not able to get like a top director in that short period of time, because Malmuth had to Stallone's manager sent him the script and said, look, the job is yours, but you got to get out here right away. So he read the script for the first time on the flight from Los Angeles to New York City. So Malmuth really had no, production planning time anyway. And Malmuth went on to do Hard to Kill with Steven Seagal and The Man Who Wasn't There, which was a 3D comedy with Steven Guttenberg, and then Pentathlon with Dolph Lundgren. So Malmuth, again, did not do too much notable after that. So I think it's pretty obvious that Stallone really was the director of this film.
Yeah, something he pretty much would become infamous for all through the 80s, whether it was George P. Cosmatos with Rambo and Cobra, and just a number of other people, even just like for himself, staying alive. You can kind of see some stuff that reminds me of Nighthawks in there with some of the New York City shots that he does.
Right. And that's like, and a lot of, like you said, a lot of the stuff that Stallone isn't credited as director later, they bring out these lot of like strange directors. There's something like another movie called Avenging Angelo. Did you ever see that one?
Yeah, I turned it off after 10 minutes.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, that one was shot in Canada. And that one's directed by, again, a Canadian director who did very, very little. So again, that one again seems to be a case where Stallone is the actual director, but they bring someone in as a, you know, a dummy or somebody who's just calling cut and action, but Stallone's the one actually directing it. So there was a lot of, like you said, throughout Stallone's career, that's been, you know, reported a lot that even though Stallone isn't credited as director, he is obviously the director on many films. Another one, I guess, is just popped out of my head, but I can't think of it. But anyway, Stallone is known for having conflicts with the directors. Okay. And one thing I want to touch on that Jeff said with Billy D. Williams. Billy D. Williams filmed this one after shooting Empire Strikes Back, but it was a few months before Empire Strikes Back was released. And at the time, Billy D. Williams said in the press that he was not happy with his role in the Nighthawks script. He said he didn't want to be one thing in the film. Stallone, somebody says to Stallone, he says, "You're out on the streets like you're the Lone Ranger." And Billy D. Williams said, he read the script and he said, "Well, I'm not interested in playing Tonto to the Lone Ranger. I don't want to be just a sidekick." And he was told that they were going to expand the role, but as it turned out, they did not. So Billy D. Williams was really not happy with, with his role in the film. It wasn't as big as he thought it was going to be. Another interesting thing, though, is Stallone and Billy D. Williams, they actually worked on the street with the actual New York City street crimes unit. They spent a couple weeks actually on the street with like a decoy unit to get into character like that.
Yeah, I there's actually a little bit of Billy D. Williams trivia, some of which I found out recently because he's promoting his memoirs and he went on Michael Rosenbaum's podcast. He actually revealed he was offered Deke Da Silva first before Sly, and the only reason he didn't do it was because he didn't want to wear the drag for the beginning and end. And he
Huh.
didn't think he was a tough enough guy to play Deke Da Silva. So I guess he decided to take the partner part instead. But speaking of, I guess this kind of goes into the deleted scenes, but it is true, like they didn't expand his part, but he had some significant moments that were shot and left on the cutting room floor. There was a scene right after the opener when they bust the muggers where they're supposed to have this heated argument because Stallone didn't pull out his gun on the mugger. And it's like, it's either you or him and blah, blah, blah. But it was supposed to be like this heated thing to show that there's like this conflict that sets up the drug bust later where it looks like Billy D's going to shoot the drug dealer with the shotgun. And so like, no, let him go. Like, calm down here. And also Billy D gives Stallone the gun that he uses to kill Wolfgar later as a Christmas gift right after the drug bust. And black women went nuts when he got his face slashed. I know that was a big controversy back then.
Right.
And then there's the Lindsay Wagner part, which a lot of her stuff was completely removed. She had a much bigger role as the ex-wife that Stallone was trying to get back with. Apparently their relationship had fallen apart because he was on the streets so much and I guess consumed by the job, like a lot of cop movies and shows tend to depict. But there was one scene in the original script that I believe was shot, and there are lobby cards of it. Right after the disco chase, he goes back to her apartment. Like throughout the beginning of the film, there were scenes like in the department store where he's trying to like make advances to her, and she just is like, she's moving on, she's dating other people. But in this moment, she's like drunk, tipsy on wine, and tries to like give Stallone some wine and tries to seduce him. And he flips out because all the stuff that he's learned about Wolfgar and then seeing his partner get hospitalized starts to give him like this PTSD, and he flips out on her. And the script, this scene was definitely written by Stallone because it's not in the original draft, because it was like a monologue similar to the end monologue in First Blood. And it probably would have been something that they probably would have been pushing him to get an Oscar nomination for, but like a lot of Lindsay Wagner scenes, it just got removed. And she just has those two moments, and then the ending when it looks like she's in jeopardy.
And Billy D. Williams, I think he's an underrated actor anyway, but I think he's really good in this movie because even though he wasn't happy with his part, I think he comes across really good with this because Billy D. Williams was kind of a underused actor. He was at the time, like you said, he was a huge heartthrob. He was I mean, when Lady Sings the Blues came out, he was called the Black Clark Gable. So he was such a heartthrob. In fact, there was even like there's an episode of The Jeffersons where he plays himself. So he was such a huge, like a cultural figure. So when he does stuff like Nighthawks, it's interesting because he has that handsome face, but when you see him get angry, it can be really scary and really believable as a street cop. So Billy D. Williams is a really underrated actor. And again, even though he's underused in this movie, what's there is really good. I wish he had done more movies like this, more gritty movies like this. And Andre, this also, like you said, there's some stills of Lindsay Wagner, obviously not in the movie. One of them, she has like a sparkly dress on, and I think that's from the scene you were talking about where she's tipsy. And then there's another scene too where Stallone is embracing her and she has a bathrobe on. So I'm thinking that may have been at the end, the way the film ends, Stallone comes out and sits on the step and looks at Rutger Hauer's body. I think there was like something where maybe Stallone embraces Lindsay Wagner after the big climax. So it ended kind of like they're going to get back together. Have you heard anything about that, Andre?
Yes, that's 100% accurate. So that kind of leads to also the controversial ending, which Stallone said the way it was shot, it was supposed to rival Taxi Driver's finale.
Right.
If you remember in the middle of the movie, after Billy D gets hospitalized, there's that scene where he's shooting target practice and he fires 6 shots into the target. That was supposed to call back later when you have Rutger Hauer going into Lindsay Wagner's apartment to go after her. And then that famous moment when Stallone turns around and another thing of drag and shoots him. But in the movie, he only shoots him twice, but you could see that there's like multiple squibs on him. The point was at that point to kind of call back the beginning scene where he doesn't shoot the mugger, he fights him. Here it's like, I'm going to blow this guy away. And there was like a different music score by Keith Emerson that you could actually find the LP, because I think it was a lot more slower or more slow motion shots. And then the last moment was supposed to be Rutger Hauer getting shot in the head. And Dick Smith, who did the makeup effects for The Exorcist, had made some sort of prosthetic head of Rutger Hauer that was supposed to basically explode. And that got removed from the final cut. So I guess that was one of those things where the MPAA stepped in and said, we're going to slap you with an X rating if you keep it like this. And it's unfortunate because for many years, people have lobbied for a director's cut with deleted scenes in them. And no one knows if it was ever destroyed in the infamous fire at Universal back in 2007. There was like a lot of lost master recordings and original prints of films that were installed in a vault. But apparently Stallone recently, with the Rocky IV director's cut, he mentioned during an Instagram Live that he might be interested in going back to Nighthawks and Rocky V and recutting them to their original format, because he definitely feels like a lot of the best stuff was on the cutting room floor, and that we never got the movie that could have been much better than what was released theatrically.
Right. Yeah, and I think my speculation is that footage was probably not destroyed in a fire, but just thrown away, because when this film was made, this was before DVD, before there was director's cuts, before there was restored versions and DVDs with alternate footage. So I think back then, once they cut it, they would just, whatever wasn't in the film, they would just throw it away, in my opinion. And as you said, Dick Smith, he also did that finale for Taxi Driver. He did the special effects for Taxi Driver. And like you said, it was supposed to be, Rutger Hauer's head blown off, or mostly blown off. And that's why when we watch the final film, we see him blown out the door, and then we never see Hauer's body again, because again, there was going to show a shot of him, his head's missing. So that's one of the reasons why we don't see his body at all, because they cut that gore out of it. The not only the effect of the head blowing off, but the after effect of the body laying there with most of the head blown off. I also think when Persis Khambatta gets killed, I think there was also supposed to be more violence there, because when you watch the film, it's very weak. She's shot in the head, but it's very weak. You just see a little. Abrupt. Was that?
It's very abrupt when she gets shot.
Yeah, and you just see like a tiny little drop of blood on her head, which of course, if she was shot in the head, it would be more effect. So I think they probably shot a more violent version and then shot what was in the film at the same time for safety, or probably with the intention of when it plays on TV. So I think throughout the film, there probably was some other gore that was cut, in addition to the Rutger Hauer head getting blown off. And I think...
I was going to say, there's some speculation that with Rambo Last Blood, that the finale, when he kills the drug dealer with the knife, that was supposed to be like the version of Nighthawks ending that he really wanted.
Huh, okay. All right. Well, I want to ask you this too, Andre. There was a few years ago, after the Shout Factory Blu-ray came out, I think there was a German Blu-ray that came out that was supposed to have a Stallone interview. And of course, there was no Stallone interview on the Shout Factory Blu-ray. Did you ever hear anything? But then I never found anything more. Did you ever hear anything about that, about a German Blu-ray coming out with a Stallone interview, a new Stallone interview?
That's news to me. I have not heard of it. All I know is that when the Blu-ray came out, it had Lindsay Wagner, it had Catherine Mary Stewart, and I could understand maybe Stallone not doing it, but you couldn't get Billy D. Williams, you couldn't get Rutger Hauer while he was still alive. Like those would have been like golden interviews to get for something like this.
Some of that may be related to cost, which is one of the reasons why some of the people are not interviewed. They may want too much money to do the interview. And also sometimes they're done at such a tight deadline, maybe they couldn't fit it in their schedule. So, but like you said, those are two big omissions, not having Billy D. Williams and Rutger Hauer. Those are two sad omissions that we didn't get on that Blu-ray. Oh, something also interesting, like you said, Randy Jurgensen, when he was fired, he was also supposed to play Stallone's superior in the film.
Yes.
And he was replaced by Joe Spinell. Joe Spinell, a legendary New York actor who is friends with Stallone. In fact, he plays the loan shark in Rocky 1 and Rocky 2. Stallone also used him in Paradise Alley. He's in Paradise Alley. He was a friend of Stallone's when Stallone was a struggling actor. So he plays Stallone's superior in Nighthawks. He has that good scene. And then unfortunately, they had a falling out. And that's why the character, the loan shark, was supposed to appear in Rocky 3 also, but they had a falling out. So the character was dropped from Rocky 3. So it's interesting, in Nighthawks, we get to see Joe Spinell, who was a part of Stallone's early career.
Yeah, funny enough with Joe Spinell, he was shooting Maniac at the same time. And when he wasn't shooting Nighthawks, he would use Universal's makeup department to do his makeup for Maniac when they were shooting that. And I think the reason, I heard the reason they fell out was Spinell's drug use, and then Stallone, as he got more popular, the people around him, like his agents and managers, made him like dump a lot of his old friends. And, gradually it was like Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis, and all the Planet Hollywood people became like his circle, and the other guys from the old neighborhood, not so much.
And something else interesting that pops up is Jamie Gillis, legendary New York porn star. He appears in Nighthawks too. He shows up as Lindsay Wagner's boss in that one scene. So that's always been kind of interesting thing how he ended up in Nighthawks. So did you hear anything about that, Andre? Any
No,
rumors
I didn't
about
even know
that?
there was a porn star in this.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, Jamie Gillis, a famous porn star, he plays Lindsay Wagner's boss in Nighthawks, which is always been a strange, interesting thing. I
I know
guess
Dar Robinson plays one of the ATAC members and had a hand in the stunt with him going up the cable on the tram.
who's that?
Dar Robinson, the
Oh
famous.
yeah, right, okay, right, okay. How about locations? Let's talk about some of the locations we see in the movie. The opening with Stallone chasing the mugger, that's the subway station in the Bronx. And then we also see the subway station in Brooklyn. Do you know, Andre, the subway chase where Stallone doesn't shoot him? Is that the Brooklyn? Do you have any idea? Subway station?
Jeff might know.
That's actually the Hoyt Skimmerhorn station.
Okay.
But in the film, they say it's 42nd Street, Times Square.
Okay. All right. And then there's the Roosevelt Island tram, which of course they had to film that during non-peak commuting hours. That was a big. There was a lot of controversy about that. A lot of people were angry about that because, of course, that caused a lot of disruptions. And I also read that Central Park was used, but did you guys? I couldn't pick it out. Did you guys see any scene? Maybe that's a deleted scene because I didn't see anything that looked like Central Park.
I think it's deleted.
I've actually not that exact spot, but I recognize like that arch when they're having an argument with the patrolman. That's definitely Central Park.
Oh, okay. That part, you're right. That part is okay. Yeah, that tunnel.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, because that's also that's in Exterminator 2 also. That appears in a couple movies, that tunnel. Okay. So you're right. That tunnel, that there is Central Park. Okay. And then the convenience store where Rutger Hauer uses as a hideout, that's on Lexington Avenue and East 100th Street in East Harlem. It turned into a place called Joy Burger Bar, but now that's closed. So I guess there's apartments over it, and in the convenience store, what I've seen online, I guess there's nothing there now, or it seems to be closed.
I'd like to know where Lindsay Wagner's apartment is because I feel like that's like the Upper West Side.
Right. Kind of looks like kind of looks a little bit like a neighborhood you see in Death Wish, the first Death Wish.
Yeah.
So it might.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's the Metropolitan Museum of Art on Fifth Avenue. That, of course, is where they filmed the big United Nations scene. And there's the exterior of United Nations on First Avenue. When Rutger Hauer first comes to New York, we see him standing outside that. That shot's actually also in the trailer. And then Xenon was a famous disco on West 43rd Street back in the 1970s and early 80s. That was the second most popular disco after Studio 54. And that, of course, is the disco scene where Stallone and Rutger Hauer have the confrontation.
Yeah, the original script was set at Studio 54.
Oh, really? Okay. Interesting thing, there's a picture I found online during the production. Lindsay Wagner and Billy Dee Williams, there's a picture of them dancing together at Studio 54. So if they didn't film the movie there, they at least got some publicity stills there. And that Xenon, we also see it in Eyes of Laura Mars and in the Gloria Gaynor music video for I Will Survive. So that was a very popular disco at the time, which of course now it's also immortalized in Nighthawks. And talked a little bit about the music. Of course, Keith Emerson, who was the keyboardist for Emerson, Lake and Palmer, a popular progressive rock band of the time. They had broke up shortly before the film. This was Emerson's first score. And actually was several different record labels bid on the rights to the soundtrack album. And like Andre said, the soundtrack album has some interesting stuff not in the film. There were different versions of stuff that we don't see in the film. I remember at the time too, but of course nowadays all the radio stations we hear, it's all pre-programmed. Back in the day, especially late night radio shows, they would give the disc jockeys free reign. As long as it fit the format, they could do different things. So I would hear I remember they played a couple tracks from the Nighthawks album on some late night radio shows at the time.
Yeah, I know Keith Emerson. I've noticed because I'm not like a big fan of his, but every now and then, like I'll dabble into his discography, and some of the songs from the soundtrack he had actually pre-produced years earlier. And the disco song that you first hear when you see Rucker Hauer meeting with the girl that he later kills, um, he released an alternate version of that on an album called Honky, and it has no lyrics. It's just the instrumental, and it's a slightly
Huh.
different instrumentation to the track, and it's slower than in the film. Actually, no, it's actually faster, to be honest.
Okay. All right. Yeah, he does. There's a remake of a song, I'm a Man. It was a
Yeah.
previous hit for the Spencer Davis group. So it was a previous hit for that. And then he did a remake of that. And like you said, obviously he did a remake of his remake, I guess, also. Okay.
It actually replaced some of the disco music in the original VHS release, because I remember when I first saw the movie, I never heard the I Am a Man part until Good Times video put it out, and they had the original soundtrack in there.
Yeah, that was a problem they had back then a lot. A lot of movies, Fast Times at Ridgemont High is another example where back then they would buy the rights to a song to put in the movie, which included television, but it did not include VHS or home video because they didn't foresee it at the time. So a lot of movies came out originally on VHS and even DVD with different songs. And in Nighthawks, like you said, that Keith Emerson song, I'm a Man, and the Rolling Stones' Brown Sugar, both of which played in that scene, the original VHS and DVD did not have those songs. So when the Blu-ray came out, that was a revelation because they went ahead and paid and got the right. So with the Blu-ray, we were finally able to hear this movie with the correct soundtrack. It was kind of like one thing Jeff said earlier, it captured this era because, of course, this movie was filmed in 1980, but the 80s hadn't started yet. It always takes a while for a decade to turn over. So we were still in the 70s. We were still in the disco era at this time. The 80s music hadn't really started yet. So that's interesting about this movie. It's filmed in 1980, released 1981, but it's still a late 1970s movie, with everything about it, including the music.
Yeah, MTV didn't hit till like months later.
Right. Okay. And let's see. Kind of like we talked about, this originally was going to be released for Christmas 1980. They held it till spring of 81. And Andre said a little bit about this. When Stallone first saw the first cut, he hated it, but they tested that. Universal tested that version at a sneak preview in Washington, D.C., and it got a really good review. The audience loved it. And they allowed Stallone to do his own cut of the movie, which added more stuff like we talked about. This final version runs an hour and 40 minutes. And obviously, Universal wanted a really tight movie for commercial reasons. Stallone, of course, wanted more of the character stuff put in, especially the Lindsay Wagner stuff, which probably made the movie close to 2 hours. So obviously, that's one of the reasons Universal was like, let's cut out the slow stuff. Let's just cut to the chase and put out a shorter movie that would probably appeal more to a commercial audience. So Stallone, they did allow Stallone to make his cut, and they sneaked it in Santa Monica, and that version bombed. It did not get as well a response. So Universal said, hey, we're going with the hour and 40 minutes version. And then, like we talked about earlier, but Universal was so happy with the response at the Washington, D.C., they went ahead and bumped it up. Instead of releasing it in May, they went ahead and put it during Easter week, which is a more lucrative time. So, and then, of course, like we talked about a little bit, and then the MPAA also insisted on their cuts as well, toning down the violence, the Rucker Hauer head blown off. And as we speculate, Persis Kambata, I think that was probably a little bit more violent too.
Yeah.
And something I said earlier, this, of course, was Stallone's first R-rated film. It was certainly the most violent film he had made. Also, the film where he has the most profanity at this time. He says the F word throughout the film too. And that was
Especially
kind of strange.
in the subway.
Yeah, right.
Mhm.
He says it, the F word several times in that scene. And I think it was almost disturbing in a way because all of his hits, all of his movies were PG, and of course, including the first two Rocky. So I think some of his fans might have been shocked by this too, shocked by the violence, even in the final version, and shocked by the language because this was showing a a cruder side of a cruder Stallone movie. So I think that might have been one of the reasons why it was kind of rejected at the time. Not completely rejected, but it was not a huge hit.
Yeah, I think also too was that, and I said this on in the Cobra thing we did a few years ago, me and Jeff. But Stallone usually would have success when he was playing underdogs, not just as Rocky, but even in First Blood, those first 20 minutes of him getting harassed by the cops and then eventually, you know, completely snapping and attacking them and taking a motorcycle, people could easily get behind that and start rooting for him. But when he would play, like, whether it's a mild mannered detective in Nighthawks or play something that was a little too cool like Cobra, they didn't really respond in the same way as a Rocky or a Rambo type of character. And I think that also, was one of those things where people just expected him to play one persona. And if he strayed away too far, nobody really cared. They prefer to watch Schwarzenegger do his one liners and blow things up than to see Stallone try to play it straight and be serious and stoic. It just, the connection's just not there.
Right, right. Yeah, interesting. Like I said, because then after he made First Blood, which I guess was his only at the time his only non-Rocky hit, and then of course First Blood Part Two was a massive success. So it was kind of like at that point he was pretty much set in that. He was later, of course, much later. He did try to do some character stuff with Copland, which of course he gained a lot of weight for that one. So I love that movie. Of course, that again was not a huge hit for him. But whatever he, even later years, whenever he tried to go against what the audience expected of him, he really, it didn't work from a commercial standpoint. He did the comedies, Oscar, which I love Oscar, but it was a big bomb. And then, of course, Stop, My Mom Will Shoot, another big flop. So whenever he tried to go outside his comfort zone, the audience really didn't buy it.
Well, with Cobra, there were many problems why the audience didn't feel. With
Right.
this film, I feel like this should have maybe given him more of a chance with audiences because, like you said, he's playing a mild mannered cop, but in the end, he's still the hero, But he's somebody you can at least identify with, especially with the Lindsay Wagner storyline that is cut up. And I know that there was a reference to a scene that I think was cut where he tried to propose to Lindsay Wagner again, and she turned him down. And I think in that scene, he actually cries. Again, this is from what I hear. And I think that would have been off putting to his fans because it would have been like, this is, Rocky, and here he is like crying, over a woman, and in the middle of all this, he's supposed to be hunting down a terrorist, so it would have been a little disorienting of like having this whole huge personal section and then, also this action film. But what I think it might have actually worked because it actually humanized the character. And again, since we're spending all this time with Rutger Hauer half the film and seeing his day to day, it would have again been that flip side of the coin, showing Sylvester Stallone, has a life and his day to day.
Did you guys notice, like, as I rewatched it recently, there's some subtle nods to Rocky in this film? And I'm not just talking about putting Joe Spinell in there, but like him fighting the mugger in the beginning and then obviously punching him out felt very Rocky like. And even when he's running down the streets to chase Rutger Hauer, he's running like Rocky would be running in the montage. And I know Billy D told him he needed to slow down because he wanted to look good, but you could tell the way that he was moving so quickly, and he would be running up steps left and right. There were clearly like some things there that were like wink wink to the audience.
Yeah. I think
Well,
also
I
he kind of has a strut too when they're like when Billy D. Williams and him are walking down the street, he kind of has that strut that Rocky has too. You
Yeah.
know, Rocky movies where he's strutting down the street. Yeah. So
Yeah, well, I know Rutger Hauer said in an interview, like again, going back to the competitive nature of Stallone, that they would try to outmatch each other, and that usually, like in running scene, Rutger Hauer found himself easily, like he could easily beat Stallone in running, which I guess adds to the realism of the scenes. But it even shocked Rutger Hauer because here's Rocky, and he can't even keep up with me in not only in the scene, but I guess even in rehearsals, he can't even keep up.
Jeff, you said it took a long time for you to watch this movie. You really had no interest. What finally got you? What made you finally say, okay, I'm going to sit down and watch Nighthawks? Do you remember?
I think it's because as I get older, I want to go back and look at more early works of maybe, again, like actors like Sylvester Stallone, who I grew up watching, but I want to see like the stuff I never got to see, like him in this or him in, I forget which Woody Allen movie he's in, his little scene in that. And just like it took me like up till a few years ago to finally watch Lords of Flatbush with Stallone.
Right.
And same thing with Billy D. Williams. Of course, I know all the stuff he starred in as the suave leading man, but I've never seen like this film where he's like more of a supporting role, even though he's almost top billed also. And I mean, really, until I saw the film, I didn't know like Joe Spinell, Lindsay Wagner were in it. And I mean, trying to catch up with Rutger Hauer's career, that's going to be hard in the first place because he's in like 50 million movies,
Right.
bit roles, small roles, supporting roles.
Right.
So
Right.
that's but again, I think out of like most of his work, this is one of the more effective ones because again, it's his first American film. And the only, I guess for me, because I have seen Rutger Hauer, we've all again grown up with Rutger Hauer. The plastic surgery, it just really looks like they just shaved his face and he gained a little weight because he pretty much looks the same to me. I'm like,
Right.
and you guys still can't recognize him. It's not that
Right.
different one.
Right.
So that scene, and I know that now again, this is something when somebody told me in high school. My math teacher told me that he had a version of the original script of Nighthawks, but at the time, I hadn't seen the movie. I knew of the movie, and he said in the version of the script he had in the nightclub scene, they identify Rutger Hauer because Sylvester Stallone walks up to him and grabs his nose and can tell that it's, I guess, not a real or not original nose. Again, this is something I heard in high school, so I don't know how factual that was. And you guys have seen different versions of the script. Was that ever in any of the scripts you guys read?
Yeah. I wanted to, yeah, while we're on this, I wanted to ask that, Andre. Yeah, let's talk about that version of the script that you have. What is different between what ended up in the film, including Jeff's question about the nose grab?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So originally, Dick DeSilva's name was DeSoto. That was one big difference. And his characters was actually written to be much angrier. Like it could have been for like an Al Pacino or a Robert De Niro type, not for Stallone. When they're in the disco, I don't recall the thing with the nose. All I do know is that they do the thing with the drawing, erasing the beard, and then they recognize him. And I think two people get shot, and then he pushes a table into Stallone and Billy D. Williams. So he knocks them out for a little bit to try to make his escape. The first draft of the script was not a subway chase, but actually it was a car chase like the French Connection on FDR Drive, and it was going to be Stallone driving a Volkswagen, and Rucker Howard driving a stolen taxi. And then I guess because of the traffic and maybe like a blocked road, he ends up escaping. So there's no running chase in that draft. There was more with the ATAC training. It wasn't just them doing lectures, but they were actually like going to do like martial arts and gun training, like stuff that would set up later in the movie. It was sort of like this could have been SWAT the movie. Is basically the way that it was put together, and again, there was a lot more stuff with Lindsay Wagner, and even the original script. I don't think they did the drag thing. It was kind of like he gets into the apartment, he chases her around, and then Stallone's in the kitchen. They have their guns to each other, and then you hear a shot go off, and then Stallone just walks out. It's like he's a survivor. It was kind of cheesy, didn't have the same impact, but it was kind of like, just a very simplistic ending in that first draft before they changed it later.
Right. So that draft is called Attack.
Yes.
Okay, with the periods, with it broken down, or
Actually, it was just written as The Attack. They
the
didn't have
Attack?
the
Okay.
Attack yet.
All right. And Silbert is credited on that draft.
Actually, David Shaper's on it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, they don't even have Silbert's name.
Huh. Okay. And that one's called First Draft. Do you remember? Or
Yeah, I think it was just first draft, and then the Hawks draft was the shooting draft.
okay. And who in Hawk draft? Who's credit on that? Do you remember?
That's David Shaper, but
By
I can
himself?
tell some of the writing is Stallone, and he just doesn't
Right.
have his name on it.
I see. Okay. Right. So my speculation is Stallone probably thought up that ending with the drag. There
Yeah,
would be okay. So in both of those drafts, does not have the drag at the end with.
only the first draft. And I know for a fact that that was a point of contention between him and Randy Jurgensen was
That's
with
right. Right.
that opening scene. They didn't know how it was possible for him to do it with the beard. And
Right.
so that led to this whole thing that led to his exit with Gary Nelson.
Jeff, when you finally watched the film, did you watch with somebody else? Because what was their reaction, or would you just watch it by yourself? Do you remember?
No, I just watched it by myself because I know growing up, I think the film was on television and I had seen a few scenes. And funny enough, I guess I was watching it with my mother at the time. And then once Billy C. Williams got slashed, she's like, I don't need to see the rest of the film. So that might have been one of the reasons why I never got to see the whole film over the years. But when I watched it again in full, no, I was just watching it by myself.
Okay. All right.
Mm.
Have either of you guys shown the film or heard from younger people what they think about it? I'm talking about like a younger generation now. Has it, because some films are popular with one generation, then the newer generations don't watch it. Other films stay popular. They continue to get a new generation. Have you guys talked to any younger people what their opinion of this film is at all?
I haven't spoken to anybody much younger than me that's seen it. I mean, I've recommended it. I've certainly talked to friends within my age group that have seen it. A buddy of mine I went to school with in Florida, who's a former paratrooper in the military. He's like a big Stallone fan, and that's one of his favorite movies. And I remember we were always kind of quoting it. And my dad and my uncle were also big fans of it. They saw it in the theater when it came out.
Right. Okay. And they liked it from the big.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
No, I don't know anybody younger than me who's probably even heard of this film. But then again, most of the people who are younger than me, the films they tend to watch are more like horror or comedy oriented, not so much in action as much. I know like some of my film buddies who are like big fans of action film, they've never even mentioned, this movie ever, and they're both from New York and, usually Stallone fans. So I'm shocked I've never heard their opinions of it.
I will say too, Paul, that when 9/11 happened, this movie was one of the films that first came to mind, along with The Siege with Denzel Washington,
Right.
because it was just basically the same thing. If somebody could just easily infiltrate the United States, act like they're just like every other tourist, and they're committing these acts of terror. And I know that was a thing that Stallone talked about. He felt the movie was ahead of its time, and the audience in 1981, coming off of Iran Contra and other controversies that were going on overseas, weren't thinking to themselves that some terrorists could come into a major city and have a big attack. But certainly more people started to pay attention to this film afterwards. It started to get more play on television as a result,
Right.
and so much so that a few years ago, Stallone talked about doing a TV show remake of Nighthawks, and Frank Grillo was attached to play Deke Da Silva, with the possibility of Stallone maybe directing some episodes and appearing in it. But since that time, this was 2021, nothing's been said about it. So, especially in this age that we're in, I'm not sure if that's even going to still happen.
Right. And something else too, I want to ask, locations. Did you guys recognize any locations that I didn't mention when you watched the film?
Not really.
No.
I've only been on the Roosevelt Island tram once in my life, and that was
Okay.
actually for a job interview.
Hey, Jeff, but the Brooklyn subway, you recognize that as being
as a Hoyt Skimmerhorn. Yes, I've been there many times. I've worked it many times. So yeah.
Oh, here's something else too. I just came across this on the internet. You always have to take all this with a grain of salt, but usually when you look this movie up, it says the budget was $5 million. And of course, it had to have been more than that. Somebody on some internet message board, he claims that he bought the production budget ledger off of eBay when it was called Hawks. And he said that revealed that the total budget was actually 11.5 million. And Stallone got 2 million for acting in it. And he also got $15,000 to do a rewrite on the script. So you always have to take these things with a grain of salt. People just, make up these crazy lies. But I thought that was an interesting, because that seems that the movie had to have cost more than $5 million. I mean, shooting in New York is always extremely expensive with the unions, and of course, having to shut everything down and the insurance. So I think it probably had to have cost somewhere around that.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
it
it
also,
made 14 million at the box office, which, I mean, you got
right.
to take into account inflation and ticket sales back in those days. But compared to what the Rocky movies were making, that was definitely a letdown.
Yeah, absolutely. Because back then, 14.9 million, that's not really, yeah, that's not much at all. Because of course, the following year, Death Wish 2 made like 16 million.
Hmm.
So, 14.9 million for a movie of that caliber, with a major star like Stallone, that was obviously a very disappointing gross. Well, I came across and of course the reviews were terrible
Yeah.
at the time. And one funny review I thought, Jack Kroll, who was a big reviewer for Newsweek, he said, "This is one of those films that isn't a film, but some repulsively complicated business deal." So it was pretty, pretty, pretty scathing reviews at the time. And not only that, it's funny. I think some of the fans, like myself, we enjoyed it, but I think a lot of the fans at the time too maybe didn't enjoy it. They saw a lot of the flaws that maybe we pointed out. So some weren't able to overlook the flaws. So at the time, it was not a critical or commercial success. So
Just out of curiosity, Paul, have you ever heard any word of maybe Stallone in that period considering a sequel to Nighthawks?
I would say certainly not, because I think at the time, he was not happy with how it turned out, especially since he was not able to release the cut he wanted. And he obviously was not happy with the money it made. And, at that time, he had had several unsuccessful films in a row. So I think at the time he saw this one as a misstep commercially and artistically because it got bad reviews. He wasn't happy with how it turned out and it did not make money. So I think at the time he saw this one as a misstep, one that he probably wished he hadn't done.
In one interview, I think in '93, that he blamed his beard as the reason the movie failed.
Okay. Yeah, that's something we didn't talk about. It's kind of like we said, he was trying to change his appearance each time, not just his face, but also his body. So I think this was one of the films too where he realized I better keep the physique and I better keep the shaved face. Although he did do some beards later. Of course, the montage in Rocky Four, he had the beard for that. Get Carter, he had a little goatee for that. And any other ones? Can you think of any other ones where he had the beard or a beard?
Well, now he's wearing the beard more, like in Samaritan and The Expendables, and obviously on this show Tulsa King.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I guess he did embrace the beard later, yeah. But at the time, he an example of some of the different stuff he was doing at the time, Martin Pohl, who produced Nighthawks, he had a good relationship with Stallone. He was very impressed with how hard Stallone worked. He had bought a book, the rights to the book called The Course Again, which is about the Far East narcotics trade. And he was wanting to do that with Stallone, which of course did not happen. And most interesting of all, Martin Pohl was talking about doing, and this got pretty far, they were talking about doing a remake of A Streetcar Named Desire with Stallone in the Marlon Brando role, which would be with Vanessa Redgrave. So that was interesting because that would have been a very prestigious production. And I think that's an example where probably by that point, Stallone was kind of like not doing anything too risky. Because after he did Victory, another flop critically and financially, then of course Rocky 3, which put him back on top. And his follow-up after Rocky 3
was First Blood.
First Blood, and then after First Blood, he did Rhinestone with Dolly Parton. So I think at this point it was kind of like he wasn't in between the Rocky and the Rambo movies. He wasn't doing anything really risky or experimental in terms of dramatic. So
he almost played a cop again in a movie where he was going to team up with Dudley Moore, and I forget the name of it, but Dudley Moore plays a conductor who witnesses a murder. Stallone has to protect him, and Richard Donner was supposed to do this movie, and it was around the time he turned down Beverly Hills Cop.
Huh. That's funny. That's probably good he didn't make that one, that's for sure. That probably.
Well, I know. I was just going to say. Go ahead.
I was just saying because that probably would have been one of the legendary missteps of all time. It could have been a classic, who knows? But that probably would have been like Rhinestone, something we're talking about. Why the hell did he make that one? So.
Well, I know, interestingly enough, like later in the late '90s, he was offered Robert De Niro's role in Jackie Brown, and he turned it down.
I don't know if this was true, but there was talk at one point that Quentin Tarantino had written a script about masked wrestlers with Stallone and Schwarzenegger were going to play those. But, I don't know if that was ever true or something like that. But that one had some potential. But that premise had some potential. But who knows if that was true or not. Andre, what made you choose Nighthawks for this session, this episode?
I think what I chose it was because we're sort of at the point of Stallone, I think, is in his twilight years in his career, because it seems like the Rocky series outside of the Creed movies is pretty much done for him. Rambo is done. I've heard rumblings whenever he decides to end Tulsa King, he might hang it up. So it's sort of like, Jeff and I had already covered Cobra, and we've talked about a couple of the later movies that he's done. And this is one I kind of wanted to go back to for a while, and also to talk to you about it, given, your interest in Death Wish and that particular period of cinema with all the urban thrillers that were coming out during that time. And this kind of being one of the last before we started getting into more the 80s blockbusters. So I think it was kind of reflective of like those 42nd Street type of movies from that
Right.
period. And just again, like one of those gems in Stallone's filmography that doesn't really get a whole lot of play.
Right, right. And it's interesting. I think Stallone has really had an incredible career, incredible ups and downs. Lots
Yeah.
of, I mean, just like Rocky, he keeps coming back. And and now he's doing some really interesting stuff. I really like Samaritan, and Tulsa King is a really good comeback for him. Uh, he's getting good acclaim for that. Uh, so he's had an incredible career that really just keeps going. What do you think of Tulsa King, Andre? Have you been watching that?
Oh, I think it's fantastic.
Yeah,
I think it's really a part that was molded for him, and the fish out of water elements of that series, with all the little locals that he comes in contact with and basically either turns them into his gang or, basically brings that New York attitude towards like the local businesses. I think it's pretty awesome, in all honesty, and some of the best work he's done in years. It
right,
reminds me a lot of what I think Get Carter could have been under better direction.
right,
So yeah, I mean, he's been looking for like a crime boss type of character to play, and this one at his age now is well suited for him.
right, right. Mhm. All right. Yeah, I know he wrote. There was a pilot. I was never able to find it, but he wrote a pilot. It's been about 20, 25 years ago. He wrote the pilot. It wasn't picked up, but it was about it was about a young priest. It was about he used to be a gangster. He became a priest.
Okay, yeah,
And
I heard
so
about this.
right. And then it wasn't picked up. And then Stallone himself, if it had continued, Stallone himself was going to play a gangster, a recurring character. And that was never picked up. So it's like you said, that's always been a good potential character for him, or an aging gangster, which of course Tulsa King has proven that he's perfect for that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right, so I guess we'll start wrapping it up. Any last thoughts, Jeff, on Nighthawks?
I say give it a chance. It is Stallone, like maybe you've never really seen him before, or at least the beginning of the action career, where it's like a good New York City gritty film. I think I agree with what Paul said. I think that since it's such a New York gritty film that is more leaning toward the 70s, I think if it had been more maybe an Al Pacino or maybe even at that time, maybe a young Robert De Niro, I think he would have been more well remembered as a New York City. But I think since with the Stallone name, everybody's expecting one thing and they're kind of surprised when they get something a little different.
Yeah, I would say the same. I certainly recommend it as a solid urban thriller of the time. Solid performances, primarily by Rucker Hauer. We didn't really talk much about Nigel Davenport, who I think also is very good as the
Oh,
Interpol
yeah.
agent that trains the cops to go after Wolfgar. I think he brings some gravitas to this that gets a little bit lost sometimes when people review this movie. And yeah, and I think, yes, the longer version of this could have actually shown a more fuller Stallone, but I think for what we got, it was different than anything that he had done at that time. And I think even his real direction actually does work here, because when you look at some of Bruce Melman's later movies, it's obvious who the real director of this movie is.
Right, right. Mm-hmm.
And then Paul, your thoughts, and also, do you have anything you want to plug? Any new books coming out?
Yeah. Let's see. Turns what I'm plugging for myself. I just did. I like all kinds of movies. I just did a commentary track for a movie called The Hour Before the Dawn, a 1944 World War II melodrama starring Veronica Lake, who's my favorite female movie star of all time. So I just did a commentary track for that, which is out on Kino Lorber Blu-ray. So I just finished up that, and I'm got some stuff. I'm doing putting some proposals together now, so we'll see what happens. And then the final word on Nighthawks, like very good urban New York thriller with interesting Stallone performance. One thing I want to mention, I'm not sure we talked about this, but this was also back when the movie was set in New York and they actually filmed it all throughout New York.
Yeah.
Nowadays, they're really not able to do that. They'll film a little bit in New York, film the rest of it in Toronto, or I guess nowadays they film it up against a green screen. So this is back when we actually were on the streets of New York filming movies. So that's one thing I like about it.
You did a commentary for the first Death Wish?
Yeah, I did. That came out early last year. I did commentary for Death Wish, which was released as a 4K UHD and a Blu-ray by Kino. So I was glad to do that because I've done commentary tracks for all 5 of the Death Wish movies now. And it's interesting because one of the first ones I did was Death Wish 2. I was offered Death Wish 2, and then I did Death Wish 4, then Death Wish 5, then Death Wish 3, and I was like, well, gee, I'm never going to get to do Death Wish, and then Kino offered me the original Death Wish, so I did that one last, but now I've done commentary tracks for all of the Death Wish series, so I'm really proud of how that one came out. The Kino.
I definitely got to pick up the first one, so because
Okay.
all of them are so much fun to hear.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, Jeffy.
Okay, so that. Oh, okay. So that ends our business this week. But as you know, we always have unfinished business to attend to. And before we go, we want to spend a special thanks to Paul Talbot for being a guest once again on the show. And as always, it's a joy. We can't wait till we can come across another deep dive for you to join us on. Or anytime you want to come be interviewed, talk about any movie you're interested in, we would love to talk about it.
If you like this review, please be sure to like and hit subscribe to be alerted to new episodes in the future.